All right, everybody. Thanks for reconvening with us for our January 31st council meeting. We are on item number 2, the adoption of minutes, but I'll just, for those that are just joining us again, I will just reiterate that we respectfully acknowledge that the land in which we're gathering is the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. And with that, we'll go into adoption of minutes.
Second.
All right. They've been moved in second, and that's for January 17th, 2:30 and 4 o'clock. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor, any opposed, and that passes unanimously. Introduction of late items. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. I have brought forward a late item related to the letter that is on the agenda from the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. And although I actually think that it is in place to bring up a motion that I brought forward in relation to that item, I would like to include it as a late item just to give council that further benefit of that. So I would move that the resolution related to the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions be included on today's agenda.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments regarding that? Seeing none, all those in favor, any opposed, that passes unanimously. Thanks for that, Councillor Hillian. And moving into delegations, we do have the Comox Valley Food Policy Council, and we have Kimberly and Marita to present today. So I'll pass it over to you guys. You get 10 minutes, and then we'll grill you with some questions. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
And will you be forwarding the slides? Somebody be forwarding the slides?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We have a very capable staff here that will be keeping up with you guys.
Great. So thanks to Mayor and Council for having us here today as a delegation. I am here today in my capacity as the coordinator of the Food Policy Council, and I'm here with Kim, and I'll just let her briefly introduce herself.
And I'm Kim Tunders, and I'm a public health dietitian with Island Health, and I'm also a member of the Food Policy Council, and I'm joining from the traditional unceded territories of the Liquitok peoples.
Great, and next slide, please.
We're just fixing things up here. 1 second.
Okay. So I obviously there's already been a territory acknowledgement, but I will also acknowledge that I am coming today from the unceded traditional territory of the Comox people. Very grateful for their knowledge in food systems and informing this work.
Right, so today we're here to give you a general outline of the purpose of the Food Policy Council and discuss some of our priority areas, as well as really the structure of how we work to act as an advisory group for municipal governments. Next slide.
Great. So the Food Policy Council in general provides a forum for advocacy and policy development, and we are really working towards this creation of a food system that's ecologically sustainable, economically viable, and socially just. We've chosen a model for the Food Policy Council that is hybrid in nature. So it is this mix of civil society, food producers, business, and local government. And I think there's been a little bit of confusion around the relationship regarding Lush Valley Food Action Society and the Food Policy Council. So just to give a little bit more clarification, Lush Valley acts as a fiscal host for the Food Policy Council and provides a coordinator, but only has 1 seat in the membership in terms of the terms of reference. So really, the Food Policy Council itself is really meant to be a regional collaboration that is moving forward on a systems level, policies and planning that relate to food systems, much as you might see the Transition Society supporting the Coalition to End Homelessness, for example. Next slide.
So the Food Policy Council is an independent entity of the CVRD. So we get some funding from the CVRD, but we function separately and are really well placed to be responsive to requests for consultation and are connected to community. So a big part of our role is to really allow consultation with the broader community, as well as work in conjunction with local government in order to advance changes in food policy. And examples we can give too is that we also can act to liaise between municipal governments and federal and provincial governments. And specifically, we can give an example of the Coalition for School Food, and we're involved at the provincial and federal level in the Coalition for School Food, and then we've also worked at the municipal level to allow endorsement and continue that work as a priority to move forward the school food, local school food work.
Great. And so, as mentioned, we're taking a systems change approach. So the Food Policy Council doesn't focus on programming, but rather where and can we affect policy change. Really, we want to take it to that third order outcome where we are seeing culture shifts and societal transformation through our work. And so we're really working specifically on that level rather than a project level. Next slide.
So to reiterate that then, so we really work on that food systems level. So really working to promote local food systems, and main principles are reconciliation, ecological sustainability, climate change mitigation, and really working on that community food security level. And how we really put our mission or our vision into action is through working with decision makers and community members to really be able to implement policy and practices that are aligned with that healthy, local, sustainable food system. Next slide.
Next slide. So again, this is our lens. These things were mentioned, but when we're putting policy forward or we're thinking about how we want to engage, we're thinking about the principles of food equity and access, climate change, reconciliation, and systems change. Next slide.
So our ongoing priorities are really around supporting regional agricultural food security plan, supporting the official community plans, the regional growth strategy, and other municipal regional planning processes. And then as you'll see, regulators really acting as an advisory board for local governments and other organizations.
Next slide. So as well as those ongoing priorities, every year we get together and we do a little bit of planning and we figure out what we want to do for the following year in terms of really specific and strategic priorities. Definitely COVID kind of threw some additional curves into this, but we are focused on local food aggregation and distribution hub and the policies related to that. Kim talked about it already, but healthy school food access and food systems education, and then really the food access and poverty policy developments. So have been our strategic priorities. And these may continue for years to come, or we may decide on different priorities next year. Next slide.
So we currently have subcommittee groups, and some of the specific areas that are current priorities as well are really looking at the current context of disruptions in food supply and how we can work to mitigate some of the food systems challenges we've had related to the pandemic and also extreme weather events, emergency preparedness too around emergency food access for vulnerable populations, bringing in the larger climate change perspective and how that relates to food systems and how much intertwined work we have with that, as well as water and the vital role, obviously, that adequate water plays in food systems.
Great, thanks, Kim. So we're putting up a slide that has the examples of successes. These are not our successes. These are all of our successes. And you can pat yourselves on the back a little bit because definitely City of Courtenay has been a big part of these successes. So as you know, early days we had, we put out a Comox Valley Food Charter, which was signed by the city and others. Municipalities endorsed the Coalition for Healthy School Food. We saw that the city of Courtenay specifically, has a food system chapter in its draft OCP, which is great. There was the passing of the urban agriculture policies. And then other pieces that you may or may not be aware of, but some policy passed through UBCM when we looked at emergency planning in the face of COVID and some missing elements of food security. Supported schools to continue programming safely during COVID-19 by helping provide information on safety planning. So we've had a number of successes, as well as mentoring other regions that are interested in starting their own food policy councils. And this February, we'll be hosting dialogues on food systems, emergency preparedness, and climate change. So those successes, obviously, we have to have political will in order to have successes, but we have the ability to just provide opportunities to local government for them to engage in food policy and food systems. Next slide.
So the Comox Valley Food Policy Council, as we've stated, is really an advisory council, and wanted to point out, I've talked a lot about municipal government, but also First Nations governments are included in that, and really around planning relating to food systems. And want to reiterate as well, though, that we welcome requests for engagement, and we have additional opportunity for participation from elected officials and municipal staff as well. So we have that representation now, but there's also additional opportunity for collaboration.
And I think this has already been stated, but we want to continue to help with the official community plan. As well, I think one of the roles that we have is just to engage the broader public in more of these processes, where we have an extensive network, so we can help do that, and we continue to help do that. And then the implementation piece, it's, how can we help local government once they have plans in place to create implementation. So there's also an opportunity for you to join us for a meeting, or also, as our terms of references are going through a revision process, it looks like it's also going to be more open for both elected officials and city staff to become members. Next slide.
So we just want to bring back for reflection, I know we have a bit of time for questions too, is thinking about, from your angle too, what you see as opportunities for us to work together on upcoming policy and planning initiatives. And also, we invite you to help by providing input into our action planning session in March 2022. So we're going to be looking at current priorities and setting ones for future action as well.
And just next slide, we probably won't have a chance to go through, in terms of our time, all of these slides, but one of the roles of food policy councils is to help local governments to navigate the confusion that food systems can bring. So it's hard, food systems are complex. Sometimes it's hard to know which jurisdiction can make which decisions. So the slides and the handout that we gave were to try to just illuminate the areas, and some of these you'll see you've already been engaged in, but areas where municipalities can participate in food systems. So I do think that that's also part of the Food Policy Council's role, is to make that clear. And the other piece I just wanted to leave folks with is that food policy is multifunctional and multi-beneficial. So you can make a decision that around a food system, such as ones that you're making now, making sure people have places to grow food when there's a new development. And that policy has benefits on the human health level, the ecological health level. It builds community in place, which is something that you are stressing in your OCP. So just wanted to close by recognizing the multi-beneficiality of food policy work. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for that. Much appreciated. I'm looking around to see if there's any questions based on the presentation. And I don't see any just yet. Oh, Councillor Hilling, 1 second.
Thank you, Mayor. We certainly can't let these fine people get away without responding to some questions and further highlighting the excellent work that they're doing for our community. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the role that you're serving. I've got several questions, but I'll try and condense it down to just a couple. First of all, how are you sustaining the Food Policy Council just now? I think you did approach the regional district looking for funds. You haven't mentioned that tonight, but I'm just wondering if you're getting support from, for example, the school district, the province, grants, and other such things. I'm also wondering how comfortable you're feeling with the breadth of membership that you've been able to draw in. For example, whether or not there's been any progress getting the food bank representatives to come to the table and take part in the Food Policy Council, among others.
Thanks so much for your questions, Doug. So in terms of the funding for the Food Policy Council, we are funded through the regional district. So I applied for what was a grant and aid, is now called the Rural Areas Funding, I believe. And so the food policy is basically, in terms of dedicated funding, the first 2 years had $12,000 a year and now has $15,000 a year. So we're really operating on a bit of a shoestring. That is one of the reasons to have it hosted with Lush Valley, is we've been able to use some island health funding that's to support advocacy, to match a few funds and utilize capacity. But we really do need to look for other avenues. We've applied to a number of different grants. I think that unfortunately, sometimes policy and advocacy work is, in my experience, harder to fund than program work. So it is kind of an ongoing concern, is how we can fund and continue to build capacity. There was a letter that went into the regional district to ask if some funds could come through as an administrative service for some funding ongoing to support the administrative functions. So I'm not yet sure where that's at, but that has yet to be seen. In terms of the food bank, I did go and have a meeting with their new executive director, and I very much asked if he would be interested in being part of the Food Policy Council, explained it to him, provided him, and also had asked if his board members would be interested, and then provided them all the information. Unfortunately, as of yet, he hasn't taken me up on that offer. But one of the reasons that we are looking to revise our terms of reference is to, we just want to have a broader based, well, we just want more members that are representative of the whole region. And I think the other piece that we're sort of coming up against, and in talking to other food policy councils, is that those that are interested in food policy councils tend to be a fairly select, small group of people. So, but yeah, we continue to figure out ways to hopefully broaden that.
Thank you. And perhaps I'll just ask another question. If you could explain what the relationship might be between the Food Policy Council and the food hub that's being developed in the community just now.
Sure. So the CVRD has completed sort of a proposal for a food hub feasibility. So there's a food hub feasibility study. So the Food Policy Council, the consultants that were hired, they consulted with the Food Policy Council, and we had a Food Policy Council member represented on the steering committee. We're hoping that we'll still be able to be involved as it heads into sort of the next phase, where they're actually looking at the current proposal and whether that will go forward or need to be changed. We did let them know, like, there were some concerns about whether or not, so looking at it from a food security perspective, there were some concerns, and we brought those to the table. But we hope that we'll continue to be involved in the process in some way, shape, or form.
Good to hear. We live in an era when everybody knows what a supply chain is, and everybody is also seeing what's happening to their food bills. And I think the issues of food security have never been more pressing than they are right now. So I just want to endorse and appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Councillor Helene. And we've got a few more questions generated. Councillor Morin.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Thanks so much for the presentation. As council knows, I'm the City of Courtenay rep on the Food Policy Council, so I'm pretty familiar with the great work. I just was curious. I know that you're making the opportunity to provide input into the OCP, but I just wondered if you had a couple little gems that you could give us in terms of just a highlight of maybe some of that feedback. We have a food systems chapter for the first time ever, and I was just curious, not to take up a ton of time, but just if you had a couple highlights, input into that. Thanks.
Sure, I can speak briefly, and then if Kim also wanted to speak to it, that would be good. I was glad to see, at the beginning of the chapter, there's mention of the other natural environment aspects, because food systems are complex, so it's good to just have that mentioned at the beginning. I was also happy to see that there is an interest in the development of a regional food security plan. I would say if I was critical about something, it would be that the access to food tends to focus on access to food outlets rather than food itself. And as we know, food security in terms of when we're talking about household insecurity, it really is about financial barriers. So we want to make sure that that language doesn't just give people access to outlets, but also recognize that food security is also related to income. And so I think that if there is movement forward on the development of a regional food security plan, it could address that. And I shared the information that I shared from the Central Kootenays. They've also just completed an action plan for food systems and food security, which is incredible in terms of just the implementation stage. So I'm also just really excited that the chapter has higher level principles that we can then drill down and get into in terms of the actual policy and how we're going to implement. Did you want to say anything as well, Kim, about the chapter?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that we were looking at that Marita mentioned is just the detailed action plan that's in the Central Kootenay region, and I see opportunities within the current goals that you have there around expanding actions around local food procurement and specific policies of how we could work together on that, as well as work on pilot projects for school food. So I think there's going to be maybe opportunities for some funding. We'll definitely be keeping our eye out, but a lot of advocacy work from the Coalition for School Food, from the provincial and federal budgets, to see some work there. So I think we're well placed now, even though to start making a bit of a plan about where we would start if we were given that opportunity to have some funding to work with. And then another piece was more around the local food procurement policies and local agriculture, and being able to act a bit more on partnerships. So there are some opportunities, I think, for different funds. We can look through Plan H and some other areas where if we're more, I guess, just really looking at projects and ready to have specific asks around planning, even if it was around the food hub and having more regional capacity for food aggregation and distribution, that we could be looking at being more strategic, I guess, around what funding we're applying for that's a partnership with the Food Policy Council and the cities.
And I think that just the idea of the food precinct, which might need a little more clarifying for the general public, but the idea of the food precinct is a really exciting one, and so I'm excited to see it in there. So I hope that answers your question. One thing I was going to say is I know there's lots of opportunity. Nancy and Tats did reach out, so there's an opportunity. And at our next Food Policy Council meeting of the whole, we're going to discuss the OCP in more detail so that we can provide feedback as a group as well.
Excellent. Thanks for the answer. And we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Marino and Kim. I guess, I'm hearing that you guys are trying to do policy stuff, but I also see you dipping your toes into sort of some action things and getting grants. And I think that must be difficult. But I guess I was thinking about the relationship between local governments and the school district and how we might strengthen that relationship, and if there's any policies you see forthcoming that might bring us together so we can do a better job of getting safe food into schools, which I think could be the ground floor for making sure that people are fed. Do you see any policies coming down the pipeline that you might want to introduce to us or that we should be thinking about? And just to also throw on top of that, it also seems like you guys should be and are working with regional district more than individual municipalities. So if you wanted to comment on which relationships need the energy and that sort of thing.
Sure. So and now this isn't specific to policy, but just that we have been, working with the school board, but want to work with them more. But there was, and maybe actually, Kim, you might be even better at remembering the details, but basically the school board is moving forward with kind of a food systems action plan of their own, which is great. And I think there's going to be lots of opportunity there to, I'm hoping, bring city and local government in. We are just reaching out to some of the school board. I'm trying to remember what Vicky's
Director of Instruction.
Yeah.
Collier, I think, or Collier.
Who's been moving this forward to try to meet with her and just see how we can support. But it's, it's good news that these motions that are being made at the school district board level are starting to trickle down into action plans. Yeah, because a while back we were trying to start, we were starting a school food subcommittee group, but we didn't want to do that without the school district. So we've been holding back a little bit just to figure out where makes the most sense to position ourselves. So I think I'm not really answering your question, but what I am saying is there seems to be some movement within the school district towards both the school food side and the food systems education side. And my hope is that we're going to continue to see ways to be involved and support that. In terms of, the Coalition for Healthy School Food. So there was, and I don't know if Kim, you can speak to this. Kim's our liaison for the Coalition for Healthy School Food. But there were some big announcements in terms of federal and provincial budget items recently. So not policy specific, but supporting policy that would make these programs more accessible. And within that too, they are looking at potential pilot projects across Canada. So they are aware of the work that's happening in the Comox Valley, and they have been really impressed with the work. And so, that might enable, there is a possibility that we could be part of a pilot that looked at that school food program. Universal school, healthy school food program. I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I would say I'm unsure on the specific policy opportunities at this point, but that it is something that's being worked on, and now there's been a mandate for the federal level for there's a federal food policy council that the coalition is going to be working with around some school food policy. And then I think there's going to be an opportunity at the local level to work on that and provide input. And then I think that could really be a nice way to build some partnership between them, the city and school district 71. And like Marita laid out, we are kind of in the early stages of finding some key school district partners for the school food policy council, but not to say we have a school trustee who's very involved too, but have been reaching out more as well to develop some relationships and see where we might be able to start.
Well, thanks for that. It's really encouraging to hear that you guys are working on developing those relationships for us. So thank you.
The second part of your question, just quickly, was around the CVRD and the relationship there. And I think we've, some of you may know, that the original proposal for the Food Policy Council was presented to the CVRD for them to support in principle, which they went ahead with, and of course are now funding through their grant and aid program. So we've presented to the regional district as we've gone along, and we've sort of kept them up to speed. And I think what we've been hearing within the council is that the municipalities, some members of the municipalities may be confused as to what our role is, and maybe we should do a bit of a, going around to municipalities just to let folks know that we're here and we want to be engaged with you, and we appreciate the work that you're doing in food systems. So I would say, yeah, that we do have a sort of a primary relationship with the CVRD, but also want to see where we can support municipalities.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the presentation today and being a delegation. It's much appreciated. It's generated, I think, some great discussion and some. It's always great to see what's happening in our community. So with that, we'll move on to the rest of our meeting. So Kimberly and Marita, you guys have a great evening.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
All right. Next, under financial services, we have the Parcel Tax Review Panel. So I'd like to move the motion.
Thank you, through the mayor. Ms. Waika is here to give a short introduction.
Should we move the motion first, or do you want to discuss it first? Oh, sorry.
My apologies, got ahead of you there.
It's all good. And I think it's somewhat housekeeping type. So Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I'll move that based on the January 31st, 2022 staff report, Parcel Tax Review Panel 2022, Council approve option 1 to establish the time and place of the Parcel Tax Review Panel as Monday, February 28th, 2022 at 3 p.m. at the CVRD Civic Room here.
All right, it's been moved and seconded, and I will give it back to Mr. Garbutt. I think you were passing.
You can go.
Oh, Renata.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, through the CEO to Mayor and Council. So again, the purpose of this report is to establish February 28th at 3 p.m. for the sitting of the annual Parcel Tax Review Panel. So every year when new rolls are added to the tax roll, we have to calculate the parcel tax, also known as frontage. We notify the owners of the amount in meters and the dollar value that will be added to the roll. And property owners are given an opportunity to respond in writing. If they disagree with the amount, or if they have any other concerns that cannot be rectified at the staff level, they have an opportunity to bring their complaint to the Parcel Tax Review Panel. And this is why we're establishing the time and date today, so we can let them know that in our correspondence to them. However, if we do not receive any written complaints within the 48 hours before the Parcel Tax Review Panel, we don't need to hold it like we haven't had to in the last several years. And with that, I'll answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. And I don't see any questions generated. I think it's a pretty self-explanatory thing. So I do appreciate you explaining in such a thorough way. And with that, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And next we have the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, UBCM Complex Care discussion correspondence from Minister Malcolmson. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. If it's okay with you, I'd like to read out my motion and then carry on with the discussion related to that.
I think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Okay. Whereas in the fall of 2021, Courtney Council met with provincial government ministers David Eby, Housing, and Sheila Malcolmson, Mental Health and Addictions, regarding the dire need for additional social housing and related services in our community and the significant health and welfare concerns of the unhoused population, along with the related impacts on local residents and businesses. And whereas Council was advised by Minister Eby, that complex care housing was being developed to address these concerns and that the city should continue to work with BC Housing, and by Minister Malcolmson that the city should contact Island Health to pursue complex care housing. And whereas the city has now been advised by Island Health that there are no plans for complex care being implemented on the scale required in this area, and BC Housing has no current initiatives to effectively address our citizens' needs, and whereas the circumstances the ministers were advised of continued to create health and welfare issues for Courtney residents, therefore be it resolved that Council immediately seek a further meeting with the two ministers to press the case for these additional vital public services. So if I could speak to that, Mr. Mayor, nobody has to be informed about the challenges that we face as a community, which are not necessarily different than many of the communities in the province. But we've put a lot of time and energy, both on the part of our staff and council members over the past several years, working with the community to try and respond. We met with these two particular ministers in the fall. It was actually the third meeting that members of this community had with Minister Eby during that calendar year. And we pressed on them the fact that despite all of our efforts, we just can't manage the challenges that we're facing. There are too many people who do not have housing, whether supportive or otherwise, and we're continually stretched to just cope. And we've had exemplary efforts by people to provide short-term responses in emergency weather situations and at other times. We have some outreach going on in the community, but we really haven't seen a significant amount of progress in meeting the need. And I believe that when we met with those ministers, we made the situation really clear. We received a response from both of them, and they set us off in a direction suggesting, and this was very clear for Minister Eby, that complex care housing was the provincial government's response to the challenges of meeting the needs of unhoused people in our community. We received just the letter on today's agenda from Minister Malcolmson specifically tells us to go forth and talk to Island Health to talk about our interest in complex care housing. And we have, in fact, done that. And we find that there actually isn't any significant new funding that is being applied for that need. Our staff continue to work with BC Housing. We've offered land, we've offered other cooperation, and yet we don't have anything definite in terms of new initiatives that would go any distance to address the significant unmet needs that are out there. So I think that we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our community, and we owe it to these ministers to take an opportunity to sit down with them again and say, this is what you told us, this is what we did, and here we are in essentially the same place. And to hold them accountable and to push for the resources that this community needs to meet the tremendous needs of the unhoused population and to address the resulting challenges that come along with that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Helene. I really appreciate you bringing forward the motion and your work on this over the years. Councillor Morin.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll be fairly brief because Councillor Hillian really, I think, summarized the dire need for this. I think if 129% increase in call outs for drug poisoning isn't an indication that this community should have a high priority for these complex care beds or housing. I don't know what else will. All we've seen since we've had these meetings and put in requests is a steady increase, and that's just regarding addiction. We know that people who are unhoused have a variety of challenges, particularly the folks that we see in our streets and encampments. They have the most significant challenges of anyone. And that includes traumatic brain injury, physical health issues, mental health, you name it. It's not just addiction. I want to make that clear that not everybody who's unhoused has that, but that's just one example. And I really believe that we need to drive that point home. The stats are there. Island Health has them. We've been in multiple news articles because of this increase and how unbelievably hit we've been by this crisis. So I'm happy to see this resolution come forward, and I hope it results in some action. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Councillor Warren. Really appreciate that. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I really just wanted to verbalize my support for Councillor Hillian's motion and thank him for bringing it forward and for summarizing it so clearly. I think I don't think it matters what end of the political spectrum you're on. I don't think anyone thinks that people should be out on the street, and it's not the place for people to deal with any issues they might have, and we do need the province's support in dealing with these issues. So thanks again.
Thanks, Councillor Frisch. And again, if I look back to 8 or so years ago, we had a real challenge, and one of the flashpoints in our community was whether or not to close down Maple Pool, where people were staying who would otherwise be on the streets. And the idea was we would keep it open as a temporary measure while other housing was made available. Since then, we have had Braidwood and Junction open up, but Maple Pool has not seen a reduction in the amount of people living there. And that's a real challenge. To Councillor Hillian's point, we've been very focused and clear with the province that we need to deal with housing first. We need to really work on mental health, on addictions. And it's getting to a boiling point, I would say, in our community in terms of the effect it's having with those that are unhoused themselves, as well as the antisocial behavior that some of them, and I would stress a very small number of them, have, and the impact that has on those around them. So I really appreciate it. Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor, and appreciate the comments of fellow councillors. I just wanted to add for the public record, in our letter from Minister Eby, he says in part, and this is October of this past year, I encourage the City of Courtenay to continue identifying sites for future supportive housing units. BC Housing has begun to develop plans to ensure people staying in temporary spaces are connected to longer-term housing options. Also, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions has been mandated to work with the Ministry of Health and the ministry responsible for housing to develop complex care housing, which will provide an enhanced suite of services to people whose needs are not currently met by existing supportive housing. Planning is underway, and local governments will be key partners in this work. And then Minister Malcolmson writes to us and says, in part, in our meeting, we discussed your community's complex care needs and community agency support for the development of a complex care housing site. You also shared with me the impact on services and supports you feel as a hub city, and your strong support for expanded harm reduction supports and prescribed safe supply. And then she goes on to say, our ministry is working hard across government to create an accessible, robust, and culturally safe system of mental health and addictions care that meets people where they're at. As discussed, ministry staff will connect with Island Health on your behalf to confirm the best contact for you regarding your interest in complex care housing. So of course, we followed up and from our MLA got the name of the key contact person at Island Health, who we then contacted and found out, well, this is really a BC housing initiative and Island Health only has kind of a support role. You really need to talk to BC Housing. Well, then we talked to BC Housing and we get no commitment there. So I don't necessarily think that the ministers who met with us are in any way insincere and don't want the best for our community and our citizens. But we're dealing with the complex web of provincial bureaucracy. And I think at the very least, we deserve clear and straight answers about what funding is there and what initiatives will be taken in the short term and how long we might have to wait. Because if we know that, we're better able to focus our attention and decide what steps are within our control and what aren't. But in the meantime, I think that we have to be relentless in our lobbying with these two particular ministers about the need for services in this community. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hillian. Again, appreciate everybody's feedback on that today, and really hope that we can move the dial on this as soon as possible. That being said, all those in favor? Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And next we have correspondence from the Courtenay Fire Department. It's been moved and seconded, and Mr. Garbutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Chief McDonald is here to give a briefing on the attached staff report.
Thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council. The last quarter of 2021 was very busy for us. It seems like I say that every time I meet with you, but we responded to 332 incidents between those dates. Greatest number of responses our department has made in our 106-year history, breaking the record of 295 responses we set in the third quarter of 2021. Major fires of note included the Travel Lodge fire on October 19th. We also responded to 7 other structure fires, both in the city of Courtenay and the fire protection districts during the last quarter of 21. We had a number of wind events that happened in the month of October, which resulted in a number of calls involving down hydro lines. And then, of course, the cold weather and the significant snowfall we had at the back end of December resulted in us actually responding in total to 134 calls in the month of December. But of them, 68 of them occurred between December 21st and December 31st. So usually a month's worth of calls on average that we did in a 10-day period. In terms of fire prevention activities, we did another 501 inspections in the last quarter, some public education events. We did 14 fire investigations, which were spinoffs from the structure fires that we attended. And yeah, that was pretty much it for the last quarter. Very happy to report no major injuries to any of our firefighters, which is very good, especially considering how active that they were during this time. At this time, I'll open it up to questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the report. I see that Councillor Hillian has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks very much, Chief McDonald, for the report and the work of your department. I once spoke to a police officer who said that there were 2 theories about the causes of traffic accidents. The first was that there were 3 causes: mechanical failure, act of God, or human error. And the second theory was that there was only 1 cause, and that was human error. So with that as a bit of an intro, I'm just curious about the causes of the fires that you're responding to, and if we ever get reports back on what the breakdown of those causes are, how much of them relate to are also only to human failings to take proper precautions, and how you actually record and inform on those reasons.
Excellent question. Thank you. So when we do our fire investigations, we're required to do those under the Fire Services Act, the regulation that says fire departments have to do their investigations for fires. When we go out, we try to determine cause as best we can. We'll look at the fire basically working from area of least burned towards the area of most burned. Work sometimes in collaboration with the RCMP, their investigators, sometimes private investigators are there at the request of the insurance carriers. Long story short, we work as a team. We try to determine the cause as best that we can. We take that information and then we submit it to the province, so the Office of the Fire Commissioner. They in turn compile the stats, and they would be basically provincial stats. So it doesn't matter if the fire is in Burns Lake, Courtenay, where have you. And then through them, you can access the information when they get the reports out. They don't often get the reports out in a super timely manner. Obviously, they have a bunch of data to go through. So usually when we do get it, the data is a little bit, could be a couple years old, but it does give us some ideas as to, what are some trends or whatnot. From our experiences, it kind of depends on the time of year. So during the cold snap, we had lots of fires that were caused by people plugging in too many space heaters in extension cords, for example. We had a couple of fire calls that were caused from that. We had a couple of fire calls that were caused by misuse of smoking materials. We also had some that we weren't able to figure out because of the amount of damage that was done to the fire. And it made the investigation very difficult to determine cause. So a lot of them, to your question, a lot of them are human caused in terms of whether it be an ignorance to a hazard or a part failure, something that was constructed by people. But yeah, it's quite a diverse reason for all the calls.
Thanks. And I'll just follow up by asking how much follow-up there might be between your department and other city departments when there are actions that the city could potentially take that might help to prevent some of these fires.
We actually don't have a lot of crossover with the other departments for those types of, fire call. We don't have a lot of crossover often with the city departments for fire related stuff. Usually the fires are, more with the property owners of the individuals involved. Where our interaction with the city comes is actually with the mitigation of the scene. So getting a hold of Public Works, having them come out and assisting us with cleanup, providing guidance on water systems if we need to move a lot of water, which would be the best hydrants to use, things like that. That's where we get involved mostly with our departments, and then also working with bylaw if we have any items that might be outstanding after the fact. So securing of a premises that has been burned up, or maybe accumulations of combustibles on properties, things like that.
Thanks very much, and appreciate your ongoing work.
Oh, thank you.
And Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the report. I was curious about the very end of the quarter. Of course, that's where we had the really extreme cold. And I know there had been some reports of folks trying to keep warm and lighting fires. And I was curious whether you saw an increase in those types of fires towards the end of that quarter, because I did have a conversation with a fellow who was accessing the warming center, the warming center that was put in operation during that time. And he actually said to me, "Oh, I won't have to light a fire outside tonight because I have somewhere to stay warm." And I thought that was pretty striking, and it really drew the parallel to having shelter for folks and how it can help mitigate some of these concerns. So I was just curious whether you did see any increases with those types of fires towards the end of the quarter, or if you maybe saw a decrease when the warming centers were opened up. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. It was fairly steady, regardless of whether the warming center was open or not, whether it was at the RD or if it was through Connect. The outdoor fire activity, especially in the area of City Hall, was fairly consistent through the month of December and through the first part of January. Some of the fires were just that. They were individuals trying to stay warm during the cold. Other fires were more social. So the activities, 10 people in attendance, kind of hanging around, what have you. We encountered quite a few of those as well. So definitely more fires. Some of them would be attributed to the weather for sure, but we also experienced other types of fire that would be more related, I think, to urban issues in general.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. And you're good. Excellent. All right. Well, with that, again, thanks so much for the work you do and all the volunteers at our local fire department. It's great to get an update. And with that, I will call the question. All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. And thanks very much, Chief McDonald, for the report.
Thank you.
Next, we have the reports and updates from council. And we can start with Councillor Cole Hamilton. Nothing to report. Councillor Frisch, Councillor Hillian, Councillor McCollum, Councillor Morin, and Councillor Theos. Wow, it's all good. I don't know if it's worth mentioning. I know that I believe at our last meeting, Dr. Kerr had created a group to look at enticing doctors and physicians to move to the Comox Valley. So I believe you guys have had an introductory meeting there. So I just want to thank our councillors who've attended those meetings. And beyond that, I've had a meeting somewhat related to the motion that Councillor Hillian put on. I met with Mayor Staples Duncan, where we discussed some of the challenges that we're having, especially around the general homelessness and mental addictions and mental health and addictions issues. And some of the pilot projects they're doing and some of the projects that we're doing here. And also had a call with VHA just to get an update on the issues that they're doing and the planning that they're having with the changes with Omicron and what that has meant to their staffing, which obviously has been a huge impact. We also had a meeting with Comox First Nation, where we now have a standing meeting at each of their council meeting once a month, so we can keep updated. And this meeting was really an introduction to talk about some of the major projects, but really kind of drilling on a couple of them, which was good. And then lastly, on the weekend, the community awards that the chamber puts on. So just want to give a hearty thanks to all the winners, all the people that were nominated, and obviously to the chamber themselves that even during a pandemic are going through the motions to make sure we're still taking the time to celebrate and recognize those in our community that are doing an amazing job. With that, I'll pass it over to Councillor Hillian.
Well, thanks, Mayor. You just did jog my memory. I wanted to share with council that I had the opportunity last week to tour our local search and rescue facility. And this was actually following up a presentation by Mr. Paul Berry from Search and Rescue to the regional district. They're looking to get a new home or expand the one that they're in. And I would encourage other members of council and staff as well, if you have the opportunity to go over and see what our local search and rescue have. They're one of the more outstanding groups in the province, and the array of equipment and what they do with it is really very impressive. And they've been working in this community for many, many years. They're a vital service when we need them to rescue somebody in the outdoors. And they work with many other agencies in that regard. They're all volunteers. And I think that if there's anything that we can do to support them in their quest to get a better facility to continue their operations from, that hopefully we'll be able to do that. I also wanted to just let council know that project management meetings related to the Kuskusum site are still taking place on a monthly basis. And we have a number of new people involved, given the change in a couple of the different organizations. But we did have a meeting in the last couple of weeks, and I think we're making good progress on some of the issues towards the restoration. We did have a presentation here from Project Watershed last month, letting us know where they were at with that regard. And I would hope to update council on a regular basis as we move forward with this stage of the project. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor Helene, for that. And I'll look around just once more. Councillor Moore.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. You did remind me that Councillor Helene and I did attend the physician recruiting task force meeting, the first one, and I don't have my notes in front of me, so I'm just going to go on memory. But obviously, every community has an issue with getting physicians into the area. One of the things that I think municipalities can help with, which they alluded to, is they do have mechanisms where they're trying to attract physicians, and they provide a lot of great information about the community and the quality of life here, et cetera. So whatever we can do to assist with that, I think is great. And yeah, I'm sure Councillor Helene has a better memory than me and may want to throw in some more details, but it was a good first meeting. It was well attended, and I'll try to provide more details next time around. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Councillor Moore. And again, it is one of those things, the challenges that you hear in not just Courtenay, but the whole Comox Valley and the whole province, really, for that matter. But just that challenge of getting that family physician. So I really appreciate the energy and time to try to make sure we're really doing everything we can to attract people here. With that, I don't believe there's any resolutions of council. And so that just leaves one last thing, I think. Sorry. My apologies. I missed a whole 2 pages here. Getting right back onto our regularly scheduled program, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'd like to put forward a motion regarding an application by the Comox Valley Community Health Network for a poverty reduction grant. So whereas in December 2021, the City of Courtenay received the Regional Poverty Assessment and Reduction Strategy that highlighted a number of game changers necessary to meet the aspiration of reducing poverty levels by 25% by 2025. Whereas these game changers included increasing childcare spaces, support for seniors, affordable housing, reducing barriers to accessing services, livable incomes, and social inclusion. And whereas municipalities, the Comox Valley Regional District, the Comox First Nation, and other community partners agreed that a comprehensive coordinated strategy for collective impact rather than one-off projects in the community that did not tie into a strategy. And whereas funding for poverty reduction action is not guaranteed to be available in future years from the Union of BC Municipalities, and there is already momentum in the region to work on the game changers. And whereas the Comox Valley Community Health Network has offered to lead both the application for funding and the coordination of the game changer implementation. And whereas the Comox Valley Regional District Board of Directors voted on January 25th, 2022 to endorse the Comox Valley Community Health Network's application for the Stream 2 Poverty Reduction Grant and agreed to act as fiscal host. Therefore, be it resolved that the City of Courtenay supports the Comox Valley Regional District to apply for and receive and manage the Stream 2 Poverty Reduction Grant funding on our behalf. And may I speak to that, Mayor?
Absolutely.
It's often said that a well-crafted resolution that contains only 2 whereases. Clearly, this is could sort of take some crafting. I appreciate everyone's forbearance and listening to it. And while it does take a little while, I think it is useful to have on the record the full context as, for the reasoning behind the actions we take. So as noted, the Comox Valley Community Health Network is applying for the Stream 2 Poverty Reduction Grant from UBCM. Last week, the CVRD board voted to act as fiscal host. And just last week, the mayor, the CAO, and I spoke to Ms. McGinn, the coordinator of the Comox Valley Community Health Network, And she confirmed that what they were looking for here was the support of the city, and simply that there was no request for staff time or for any particular assistance beyond standing behind the work that they're doing. And by supporting this resolution and supporting the work that they're doing, this allows the Community Health Network to apply for a larger scale of grants. The base grant is $50,000, whereas a regional grant application has a maximum of $150,000. So that's tripling the possible gain through this grant that the Community Health Network might be able to achieve. Given the resolution was long and I've spoken for a while, I just hope this will receive the full support of council. I think you all know the great work the Community Health Network has done and continues to do in our community.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Councillor Cole Hamilton. And I'm looking around. I don't see anybody who wants to add to your motion. So we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thanks again, Councillor Cole Hamilton, for moving forward with that. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I'll just move that we receive this Horizon report. Is that fair? No, you're just going to.
It is the first time we've had these on an agenda, so that your confusion is equaled probably by. Okay, yeah. So if you'd like to read that out.
We do have to read. So can I, I'm just lost. Am I making a motion or am I literally going to read it out? From the January 17th, 2022 closing camera meeting, council rises and reports as follows: that council appoint Councillor Morin and Councillor Hillian to the Comox Valley Family Physician Recruitment and Retention Task Force, and that we rise and report on that.
No, we're just rising and reporting. So yes. Yep. And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Morin gave an excellent summary of our attendance at the first meeting. I'll just add that there was an impressive array of people, both from local government, the community, and the physician and health community. And there is substantial work that is going on through the Division of Family Practice, which has actually has some dollars to apply to this task. It was an excellent discussion, a lot of questions and comments which were responded to by the medical people there about the changing nature of medical practice, the challenges for doctors running businesses at the same time as providing care, the move towards hospital specialists, and obviously the number of people who don't have a family physician. And one stat I heard was that throughout the province, it's in the neighborhood of 700 to 800,000 people who don't actually have a family physician. And much as walk-in clinics fill the gap, I don't think any of us can underestimate the value of a relationship with a physician who knows your history and your circumstances and can support you in your individual health journey. So I know that Councillor Morin and myself are looking forward to continuing to serve on this committee that will be in place for several months, and lots to learn, and hopefully we'll have something to contribute. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that. And there's a second rise in report. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, getting good at it. So happy to share this rise in report concerning the interim deputy corporate officer appointment. And that was at a closed in-camera council meeting on January 17th, 2022. Council appointed manager of legislative services, Adriana Proton, as interim deputy corporate officer. Who is with us right now?
Excellent. Thanks so much for that. We have risen and we have reported unfinished business. We had some unfinished business about the BC Baseball Umpires Association delegation. Councillor Hillian, did you want to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So we did have a delegation, Mr. Erickson, who's involved with the Baseball Umpires Association. And I've drafted a resolution for council's consideration arising from his delegation at the January 17th meeting. Whereas on January 17th, 2022, council received a delegation from Eric Erickson of the BC Baseball Umpires Association requesting amendment of the Parks Control Bylaw to prohibit harassment of sports officials and to install anti-harassment signage at parks and sports facilities. Therefore, be it resolved that staff consult with the Comox Valley Regional District Recreation Commission and other local recreation departments to consider actions that might be taken in relation to the request, such as proactive signage and requirements in facility user rental agreements, and that staff report back to council at a future date. So if I could just speak to that, Mr. Mayor, you know, I think that the questions that were asked of Mr. Erickson indicated that council acknowledges there's a problem, and none of us want to see sports officials being harassed in the carrying out of their duties. I think all of us recognize the value of sports in our community and the key role that officials play. Often they're young people who are doing these tasks. And there's nothing worse than a young person who's learning that role to suffer some of the abuse that can be hurled in their direction. But we don't know what the answer is to this. The delegation presenter made a couple of suggestions. It may be that our staff can explore these, but it's my understanding that our recreation staff meets on a somewhat regular basis with other recreational staff in the Valley. And that would seem to be a reasonable forum to raise this issue and consider what actions might be taken. And I've just suggested a couple in the resolution that could be explored. Proactive signage is one. The other is requirements that could be written into facility user rental agreements so that the organization putting on the sporting event has a responsibility to basically prevent and respond to these types of incidents if they do happen. The resolution goes on to say that staff report to council at a future date. We know that all our staff has a lot of work. So it's, I'm not sure that we can request that there be an urgent action taken on this when it's something that really needs to be explored. So that's the basis of the wording in the resolution, that we respond in a thoughtful way and see what our staff can come up with in consultation with their colleagues in other areas.
Excellent. And any questions or comments regarding that? I don't see any. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Yeah, so now we are actually much more closer to being done, I think. Somebody would like to move adjournment? Excellent. Thanks very much. Councillor Hilling, did you have a comment or? Yes. Oh,